Thank you, Cathaoirleach, and thank you, Mr. Byrne, for your presentation. Just a couple of things. Obviously, when the decisions were being made originally, you sought legal advice as to whether you could end the contracts and what your contractual obligations would be, yeah? You sought legal advice specifically.
Again, this is us reviewing 2008. Yeah. We weren't around. The decision that was made was a decision made around the new product going forward.
Yeah, so, but that would have been done on the back of legal advice, because any situation where you have contracts involved, you obviously check them against the contracts. No, the offering, which would have been about the tracker rate offered to a new customer who walked into the branch at that point in time, and the decision was that offering was been taken away. So that was that decision. So it wouldn't have, as far as I can see, involved a legal consideration about whether that would or wouldn't have been offered to customers. What we've talked about is that clearly the consequence of that, which was much more detailed and involved, as we now know, wasn't properly thought through. So that would speak to the point that you're talking about, which is if people had really thought it through, then they would have gone through that process, but that didn't happen. I think that's astonishing, that legal advice wasn't sought. I mean, that's the first thing that anybody would do in terms of changing somebody's contract or looking at somebody's contractual obligations. I think it's absolutely astonishing. Can I just ask you, around the 4,000 people that had the contractual right to a tracker, why are they different? Why are they not getting full redress and compensation?
So these are customers who never had a tracker?
Yes.
Who, according to the contract, had the right to be offered the prevailing rate tracker. As I mentioned, the decision that was made was that that product would have been priced at a level that would have made it unattractive, so it was withdrawn from the market. So therefore, the decision was that these customers weren't disadvantaged from a commercial point of view because the rate that they would have been offered, the prevailing rate tracker, would have been unattractive. And that is why they're not included within the confines of the other option that you're talking about. These customers, well, that's the answer to the question.
I think that's grossly unfair, that there's just an amount taken and there's no compensation or no redress for them.
There's no amount taken from these customers.
Sorry?
There was no amount taken from these customers.
No, but there was a contractual obligation, as you said yourself when you described them. I want to ask you, in terms of have we been submitted with a list of the 30 different customer groupings that you examined in the first instance as to whether they were entitled to compensation or redress? Can you submit that to us, the 30 different groupings?
We can talk, yes. Yeah.
So that we can have a look at those. The other thing, have you received a letter from the Central Bank around the responsibility for senior management of the banks to report to the Gardaí if they see a violation of the regulatory code?
So in general, we can't comment on anything that the Central Bank do or don't do to us, but I know that they actually mentioned it themselves when they were here, so yes.
So have you submitted any reports to the Gardaí on the back of that?
No.
Are you concerned about the significant legal obligations? Do you think any of the banks are concerned about significant legal obligations that the Central Bank spoke about the last day?
Well, I can't comment for other institutions. We understand our obligations and have complied with our obligations.
Okay. In terms of how can people who are going into an AIB branch today be sure that they're getting the right product for them? What culture how can you explain to us, maybe in a couple of ways, how the culture has changed within the banks this would never ever happen again?
So I think if we go back to the starting conversation with Deputy McGrath, what we've talked about is how the decision that was made clearly didn't think of the consequence of what would happen. Certainly in terms of processes and procedures that exist at this stage, all products and all product decisions think forward, backwards in terms of the impact and the obligations. We have a full understanding of the obligations that sit in every product and every contract, and we've done a lot of work to make sure we understand those, which wasn't historically the case. We've also, we've had a complete change in terms of the leadership and the board and the senior management teams across the organisation, and that is to give us a fresh perspective on where we are. We have introduced quite a diverse leadership team in terms of banking and non-banking positions to make sure that we have a different perspective. We have a performance management system across the organisation that bases the assessment of individual performance 50% on what they do and 50% on how they go about doing it. So it's how people do their job is just as important, and that includes interaction with customer as it is what they actually get done. That historically would have been effectively 100% on the what side. We have a net promoter score system which allows us 30,000 individual customer contacts every quarter to understand the customer's perspective in respect of each of our product offerings and each of our customer journeys, and we rank and rate those and track those. In respect of complaints, which historically wouldn't have been analysed as forensically, we have a complaints team that effectively analyse those and look for root causes. So the issues that we're talking about here in terms of even small, modest numbers of complaints now would be picked up, and we'd understand what the underlying causes were in respect of those. And then, staff engagement is very important. We spent a significant amount of time working with our own staff to understand what they feel about the organisation. We carried out our first assessment in respect to that in 2013, and obviously morale was very low at that point in time, and the position was very difficult. The bank ranked us a 5th percentile in it's comparable organisations. It's a worldwide survey, so that was obviously very poor. When we last completed it in November, effectively we were at the 62nd percentile, which is obviously quite good and moving in the right direction. So engaged staff, interest in the customer, and we've adopted a number of pillars across the organisation. Robert, in terms of the customer perspective, because your question is around the branch and the customer, how that position might play.
Well, what I'm trying to get at, I suppose, and in relation as well to, you say there's 500 people, staff currently working on tracker mortgages. Were they recruited from outside the bank, or are they just people from inside the bank who are assigned to those roles? And what happens with them then when this tracker mortgage...
so it's a combination of, the majority of them would be staff in AIB who have moved to different parts of the bank to effectively move on to this programme. And then there would be some externals who've been recruited into the programme specifically.
How much have you invested in your IT systems in the last couple of years?
In the last 6 years, it's probably about $1.5 billion.
$1.5 billion. Do you think that's sufficient to protect people again? Because I really think it's despicable that the decisions that were obviously made to take money off people, that the systems are blamed for it.
I think what we've been identifying is a whole series of issues. Remember, we have had to fix the bank. During the period that we're talking about, the bank lost 19 billion euros operationally, and there was an extra 9 billion of losses associated with the transfer of assets to NAMA. That's the size and scale of what was happening operationally. Over the period, we've taken 450 million of operating cost out and grown the income side by 800. So it's a 1.3 billion delta in respect to that. There's a lot of things have happened and changed across the organisation, including building much more resilient systems and much more reliable systems. The conduct agenda and the prudential regulation agenda has moved on hugely, so the amount of supervision and intervention in the organisation is radically different. So we're moving in a direction. We haven't in any way achieved what we want in terms of the final position, but I think we're on a journey to get to a better place.
So something like this could never ever happen again. That's what you're saying.
That is the whole purpose of what we're about, is to make sure we build more resilient systems and more resilient management structures and accountability across the organisation.
Okay, I'll leave it at that.
Deputy Murphy. Thanks.